The sky over New York City had never looked so wrong. It wasn't cloudy or stormy, it was empty. Not a single bird, not a plane, not even a satellite glinting in the sun. Just a deep, unnatural stillness that made people stop in the middle of sidewalks and stare upward. Then, without warning, the stars began to vanish. One by one, then in clusters, then whole sections of the night sky blinked out like lights being switched off. Within minutes, a vast, silent shape hung in the heavens, black as ink, smooth as glass, and impossibly large. People screamed. Others fell to their knees. A few laughed nervously, thinking it was some kind of military drill or a hologram stunt gone too far. But the truth came soon enough, delivered not with bombs or lasers, but with a voice that echoed in every language at once, spoken through every phone, radio, television, and public speaker on the planet. You are inferior. You are chaotic. You are a threat to galactic order. Surrender your weapons. Dismantle your defenses. Submit to the Kethar Collective. Refusal will result in total planetary sterilization. The message repeated 3 times, then stopped. No music, no warning tone. Just silence after the last word, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. In Houston, Danny Lopez was eating cold pizza at his kitchen table when his phone blared to life. He wasn't supposed to be working. He'd been off duty for 2 days after a long shift at the aerospace lab. But the moment he heard that voice, he knew his break was over. He dropped the slice, wiped his hands on his jeans, and ran to his computer. Within seconds, news feeds were flooded, with footage from every major city, Tokyo, London, Cairo, all, showing the same impossible ships hanging in the sky like judgment made metal. Danny's hands shook as he pulled up satellite data. The objects weren't just orbiting Earth, they were surrounding it, forming a perfect sphere of darkness. No heat signatures, no engine trails, no communication signals. They simply existed, and their presence alone felt like a threat. He called his sister Maria, who lived in San Antonio. She answered on the first ring, voice tight with fear. "Did you hear it?" she asked. "I heard it," Danny said. "Stay inside. Don't go near windows, and whatever you do, don't panic." But panic was already spreading. Across the globe, government scrambled. Emergency broadcasts urged calm, but the streets told a different story. Cars jammed highways. Supermarkets were stripped bare in minutes. Some people prayed. Others armed themselves with whatever they could find. Baseball bats, kitchen knives, old hunting rifles. In a remote cabin outside Missoula, Montana, Lisa Moore heard the message through her shortwave radio. She'd left the Marines 5 years ago, tired of orders and politics, seeking peace in the quiet woods. But old instincts died hard. She stood up slowly, walked to the wall, and took down her rifle. She checked the chamber, loaded a fresh magazine, and stepped outside. The air was crisp, the pines swaying gently in the wind. Above her, the sky was clear, too clear. She knew what that meant. If the aliens could silence satellites and block starlight, they controlled the high ground. And in war, the high ground always wins. Back in Washington, D.C., the United Earth Defense Council, a hastily formed alliance of military and political leaders, met in an underground bunker beneath the Pentagon. Arguments erupted before the first agenda item was read. The French delegate demanded immediate negotiations. The Indian representative insisted on activating all nuclear arsenals as a deterrent. The Brazilian minister wept openly, saying surrender was the only way to save children. Only General Helen Briggs remained silent. She sat at the far end of the table, arms crossed, eyes fixed on a live feed of the alien fleet. She'd seen war before, in deserts and jungles and frozen wastelands. But this was different. This wasn't about territory or resources. This was about extinction. Hours passed. No one slept. Outside, cities grew darker as power grids failed under the strain of mass evacuation, and cyber attacks no one could trace. Yet the Kethar did nothing. No shots fired. No demands repeated. They simply waited, as if giving humanity time to choose its own end. Danny, now working remotely with his lab team via encrypted channels, noticed something strange. The alien ships weren't just passive, they were scanning. Deep, rhythmic pulses of energy swept across Earth's surface every 17 minutes, mapping everything from ocean currents to subway tunnels. They weren't just studying defenses. They were studying life itself. "They're cataloging us," he whispered into his headset. "Like we're specimens." Lisa, meanwhile, drove into Missoula under cover of night. She needed supplies, ammo, batteries, medical kits. The town was eerily quiet. Storefronts were dark. A few people huddled in groups, whispering. She moved quickly, efficiently, like she was back on patrol. At the gas station, an old man recognized her uniform from years ago. "You think we got a chance, Lisa?" he asked, voice trembling. She looked him in the eye. "We always have a chance. As long as we're breathing, we're fighting." Back in Houston, Danny received an encrypted message. It was from a contact inside the Defense Council, someone he'd worked with during a classified propulsion project. The message was short. "Report to Site Theta, now clearance level Omega." He didn't ask questions. He packed a bag, kissed his sleeping dog goodbye, and drove through the night toward Nevada. He didn't know what Site Theta was, but Omega clearance meant only a handful of people in the world even knew it existed. As dawn broke over the desert, the first Cathar ship moved. Not toward Earth, but sideways, aligning with the others in a perfect geometric pattern. Scientists watching from observatories held their breath. Then, without sound or flash, 3 orbital defense stations, massive platforms bristling with missiles and lasers, simply disappeared. One moment they were there, the next empty space, no debris, no explosion, just gone. That was when the world truly understood. The Cathar didn't need to bomb cities. They could erase them. But in that moment of despair, something else stirred. Not hope, not yet, but defiance. In bunkers, basements, and backyards, people began to talk not about surrender, but about resistance. They shared plans, built radios from scrap, taught their kids how to hide and survive. Humanity had been backed into a corner, and corners were dangerous places to trap a human. Because humans didn't just fight to survive. They fought to prove they deserved to. The world didn't fall apart all at once. It cracked slowly, like ice under too much weight. After the Cathar erased the orbital stations, panic turned into something quieter but more dangerous: distrust. Nations that had shared intelligence for decades now hoarded data like gold. Some countries shut their borders completely. Others declared martial law. In Geneva, the United Earth Defense Council nearly collapsed when the Russian delegation walked out, accusing the Americans of hiding weapons. In Nairobi, riots broke out when rumors spread that the government had already agreed to surrender. But beneath the chaos, something else was happening. Small groups, scattered and disconnected, began to act. Farmers in Iowa buried fuel tanks and rigged tractors with armor plating. Teenagers in Seoul hacked into old military drones and reprogrammed them to carry explosives. In Buenos Aires, retired engineers built signal jammers from microwave parts. No one was in charge. No one gave orders. People just did what they thought might help. Danny Lopez arrived at Site Theta just before sunrise. The entrance was hidden inside a dry lake bed, marked only by a rusted radio tower. 2 armed guards in unmarked uniforms checked his ID 3 times before letting him through a steel door that hissed open like a spaceship airlock. Inside, the facility was colder than the desert night outside. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead as he followed a narrow corridor deep into the earth. He was met by General Helen Briggs herself. She looked older than in the news feeds, tired but sharp-eyed. She didn't shake his hand. She just nodded and said, "You're here because you understand resonance fields better than anyone alive. We need that brain. Not your opinion, not your fear, your brain." She led him into a massive chamber where a strange device stood in the center, suspended by magnetic rings. It was about the size of a school bus, smooth and silver, covered in glowing blue lines that pulsed like veins. Wires snaked from it into walls lined with supercooled servers. Scientists in lab coats moved around it like priests around an altar. "This is Project Icarus," Briggs said. "It was mothballed in 2041 after the Geneva Accords banned quantum destabilization weapons. But last night, the president signed an executive order to restart it. Full priority, unlimited resources." Danny stared at the machine, his mind racing. He'd read rumors about Icarus during grad school, whispers of a weapon that didn't destroy matter, but unraveled the very fabric holding it together. Most thought it was a myth. But here it was, real and humming with power. "What does it do?" he asked, though he already knew. "It creates a localized collapse in quantum coherence," Briggs said flatly. "In simple terms, it makes things stop existing. Not explode, not melt, just cease, like they were never there." Danny swallowed. "And you want to use it on the Cathar fleet?" If they hit us with everything they've got, we'll be ash in a week, Briggs said. This is the only thing that might scare them off. Or kill them. Either works. Meanwhile, in Montana, Lisa Moore received a call from an old contact in the Pentagon. The voice on the other end was rushed, almost whispering. We're assembling a tactical team for a special mission. High risk, no backup. You're at the top of the list. Lisa didn't ask what the mission was. She just said, where do I report? Nevada. Site Theta, you leave tonight. She packed her go bag in 10 minutes, rifle, sidearm, medical kit, extra socks. A photo of her younger brother who never came home from the Pacific War. She drove through the night again, this time with purpose in her chest instead of dread. Back at Site Theta, Danny worked non-stop. He barely ate. He slept on a cot in the lab. His job was to stabilize the resonance matrix, the part of Icarus that kept the quantum collapse from spreading beyond its target. If it failed, the weapon could tear a hole in reality itself. He ran simulations, adjusted frequencies, recalibrated feedback loops. Every hour, new data came in from spy satellites showing the Cathar fleet growing larger. More ships arrived daily, sliding into position like pieces on a chessboard. The world above grew darker. Cities went dark to avoid detection. Air traffic stopped completely. The internet flickered in and out as undersea cables were cut. Sabotage or accident, no one knew. But inside Site Theta, time moved differently. It was all equations, alarms, and hushed voices. Lisa arrived 3 days later. She was given a uniform, a badge, and a briefing, so classified it had no paper trail. She met Danny in the control room. He looked exhausted, eyes bloodshot, hair messy. She offered a nod. He gave a weak smile. You're the field commander? He asked. For whatever good that does, she said. I've led raids on pirate bases, not alien armadas. They're just another enemy, Danny said, though he didn't sound convinced. General Briggs called them both into her office that evening. The walls were lined with old maps and photos of past wars. She poured 3 cups of black coffee and got straight to the point. The Cathar haven't attacked ground targets yet. They're waiting, testing us, seeing if we'll break. But we won't. We're launching Icarus in 7 days. We've built a ship, the Odyssey, to carry it into the heart of their fleet. Lisa, you'll lead the deployment team. Danny, you'll be on board to manage the device in real time. Lisa didn't flinch. What's the survival chance? Briggs looked her in the eye. Low, but not zero. Danny rubbed his face. If the resonance field destabilizes during activation, the whole ship and everything within 1,000 kilometers could vanish. Then don't let it destabilize, Briggs said. Outside the bunker, the world kept falling apart, but inside a new kind of unity formed. Scientists, soldiers, engineers, all working toward one goal. No politics, no blame. Just work. Lisa trained her team in zero-gravity simulators. They practiced emergency protocols, weapon handling, and silent communication. Danny ran final tests on Icarus, his fingers flying over keyboards, muttering equations under his breath. He thought about his dog back in Houston. He hoped someone was feeding him. One night, Lisa found Danny sitting alone in the observation deck, staring at a live feed of the alien fleet. She sat beside him. Scared? She asked. Terrified, he admitted. But if we don't do this, no one will. She nodded. Then we do it right. 7 days passed. The Odyssey was ready. A sleek, needle-shaped vessel built from salvaged parts and secret tech. It had no weapons, no shields, just speed, stealth, and one terrible payload in its belly. The Cathar still hadn't moved. They watched. They waited. Humanity, for the first time in weeks, stopped waiting. They prepared. The Cathar struck without warning. One moment, the world held its breath in the fragile quiet of waiting. The next, fire rained from the sky. Not missiles, not lasers, something worse. Beams of pure silence, black pulses that erased everything they touched. New Delhi vanished first, then Berlin, then Sydney. Not destroyed, not burned, simply gone, as if someone had lifted the cities off the map and left only empty land behind. No rubble, no smoke, just flat, clean earth where millions had lived. Panic became terror. Governments that had argued over surrender now screamed for action. Refugees flooded rural areas. Hospitals overflowed. But amid the horror, something unexpected happened. People stopped running. They started fighting back. In Chicago, a group of high school students used old weather balloons to lift EMP devices into low orbit, frying Cathar scout drones. In Cairo, street artists painted false heat signatures on rooftops to trick alien sensors. In Rio, fishermen towed sonar buoys that jammed the deep space scans. It wasn't enough to win, but it was enough to prove humanity wasn't broken. At Site Theta, alarms blared the moment the first city disappeared. General Briggs stood in the command center, face pale but steady. "They're testing our resolve," she said, "and showing us what happens if we fail." Danny watched the feeds with hollow eyes. He knew those cities. He'd visited Berlin once, eaten currywurst near the Brandenburg Gate. Now it was just empty. He turned away, fists clenched. "We launch now," he said. "Not in 3 days now." Briggs shook her head. "The Odyssey isn't ready. The resonance dampeners need another 48 hours. "We don't have 48 hours, Lisa said, stepping into the room. She'd just returned from a field exercise, her boots still dusty. "They're picking off cities one by one. Next could be Houston. Or Missoula. Or here." A heavy silence fell. Then Briggs nodded. "Prep the ship. Launch in 6 hours." The next hours were a blur of motion. Technicians sprinted through corridors. Engineers welded last-minute shielding onto the Odyssey's hull. Danny ran final diagnostics on Icarus, his fingers trembling but sure. He'd added a failsafe, a manual override that would let him shut down the device if the field started to spread. It wouldn't save them, but it might save Earth. Lisa gathered her team, 8 volunteers, all ex-military, all knowing this was likely a one-way trip. They didn't talk about fear. They checked gear, shared rations, and told old jokes to keep their hands from shaking. One of them, a quiet man named Carl from Oregon, handed Lisa a small wooden carving of an eagle. "For luck," he said. She tucked it into her pocket. The Odyssey sat in a hidden launch bay beneath the desert, its engines cold and dark. It looked fragile next to the massive warships of old, but it was built for one thing only: speed and precision. No weapons, no armor, just a needle carrying a plague. Danny boarded last. He carried a small backpack with spare parts, a water bottle, and a photo of his dog taped to the inside flap. He found his station near the Icarus core, strapped himself in, and took a deep breath. The ship smelled of metal, oil, and ozone. Lisa walked the length of the vessel, checking each crew member. She stopped at Danny's seat. "You good?" she asked. "No," he said. "But I'm here." She gave a small nod. "That's all we need." Above ground, the sky darkened again. More Cathar ships descended, forming a tighter ring around Earth. Their silence was worse than any scream. They knew humanity was cornered. They expected surrender. What they got was a spark. At 0317 local time, the desert floor split open. Hidden rails shot the Odyssey upward like a bullet from a silent gun. No fiery plume, no roaring engines. Just a whisper of ionized air as the ship pierced the atmosphere and vanished into the black. Inside, gravity faded. Stars appeared through the viewports. Real stars, not blocked or hidden. For a moment, it was beautiful. Then the Cathar noticed. Alarms blared on the bridge. Red lights flashed. "They've locked on," Carl said from the sensor station. "Multiple targets converging. Evasive pattern Delta," Lisa ordered. "Keep us small. Keep us fast." The Odyssey twisted through space, dodging energy pulses that turned vacuum into static. Danny monitored Icarus, sweat beading on his forehead. The device was stable for now, but every jolt from near misses sent ripples through its field. One direct hit and it could trigger early. "Hold together," he whispered to the machine as if it could hear him. Back on Earth, people watched the skies again. Not with fear this time, but with hope. Rumors spread that a ship had launched. That humanity had struck back. In basements and barns, in subway tunnels and mountain caves, people held their breath and prayed for a miracle. The Odyssey reached the edge of the Cathar formation. Thousands of ships, each smooth and black, drifted in perfect formation. No lights, no movement. Just waiting. Lisa studied the display. They're not guarding anything. They're showing off, like they know we can't touch them. "Then let's prove them wrong," Danny said. He activated the final sequence. Icarus hummed to life, its blue veins glowing brighter. The ship shuddered as the core drew power from every system. Even life support dimmed to feed it. 30 seconds to optimal range, Carl called out. Lisa gripped the armrests of her chair. Steady as she goes. Outside, the Cathar began to move. Not to attack, but to surround. They formed a sphere around the Odyssey, closing in like wolves. Their confidence was absolute. They had erased cities. They had silenced nations. What was one tiny ship? But they didn't understand humans. Humans didn't just fight with weapons. They fought with ideas. And this idea was about to become a masterpiece. The Odyssey hung in the void, surrounded by thousands of Cathar ships. They drifted closer, silent and smooth like sharks circling wounded prey. Inside the human vessel, the air grew thin. Lights flickered. Every system not tied to Icarus had been shut down to feed the weapon one last surge of power. Danny's fingers hovered over the final activation key. His heart pounded so hard he could hear it in his ears. Lisa sat in the command chair, eyes locked on the main display. 10 seconds to optimal position, she said, voice calm despite the tension in her jaw. Hold course. Carl at sensors swallowed hard. They're not firing. They're just watching. Good, Lisa said. Let them watch. The Odyssey slid into the exact center of the Cathar formation. It was a perfect sphere of darkness, each ship spaced with mathematical precision. The aliens had built a cage of certainty. They believed nothing could break it. They believed they had already won. Danny took a breath. Activating Icarus, he pressed the key. At first, nothing happened. The ship stayed still. The Cathar ships didn't move. Then, deep inside the core of Icarus, a single atom unraveled. Then another. Then trillions. A wave of silence spread outward. Not soundless, but existenceless. It moved faster than light, slower than thought. It didn't burn. It didn't explode. It simply told matter that it no longer belonged in this universe. The effect was beautiful in its horror. One Cathar ship vanished. Then 10, then 100. Not in a chain reaction, but in a perfect ripple, like a stone dropped into a pond of reality. Where the wave passed, there was no debris, no energy burst, no echo, just empty space. The ships didn't scream. They didn't fight. They ceased, as if they had never been built, never flown, never threatened a world called Earth. On the Odyssey, alarms blared, not from damage, but from the sheer distortion in local spacetime. The ship groaned as reality bent around it. Danny watched the monitors, eyes wide. Field is holding, he said, voice shaking. But it's spreading faster than predicted. How much time? Lisa asked. 5 seconds. Maybe 6. Outside, the destruction continued. The Cathar fleet, once a symbol of unstoppable power, was being erased like chalk from a board. The ripple reached the outer edges of the formation. Ships tried to flee, but the wave moved through dimensions they couldn't understand. They vanished mid-turn, mid-thrust, mid-thought. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The wave collapsed in on itself, folding back into the Icarus core like a sigh. Silence returned, but this time it was human silence. The kind that comes after something impossible has happened. On the main display, less than a third of the Cathar fleet remained. The rest was gone. Not destroyed. Not disabled. Gone. The surviving ships did not attack. They did not regroup. They turned as one and fled, vanishing into the deep black at speeds that defied physics. They ran like prey that had just learned the hunter was real. Inside the Odyssey, no one cheered. No one spoke. They just stared at the empty space where an armada had once been. Carl let out a shaky breath. Did we win? Lisa unbuckled her harness and walked to the viewport. Stars shone again, real, unblocked, free. We gave them a reason to leave, she said. That's enough for now. Danny slumped in his seat, exhausted. The Icarus core was dark now, its job done. He looked at his hands. They were still trembling. It worked, he whispered. It actually worked. Back on Earth, people saw the change in the sky. The black veil lifted. Stars returned. The oppressive weight that had hung over the planet for weeks lifted like a bad dream ending. In cities and villages, people stepped outside and looked up. Some cried, some hugged strangers. Others just stood in silence, staring at the night as if seeing it for the first time. In Houston, Danny's neighbor fed his dog and sat on the porch, watching the stars reappear one by one. In Missoula, the old man from the gas station lit a candle and placed it in his window, a small light against the dark. At Site Theta, General Briggs received the confirmation signal from the Odyssey. She didn't smile. She just closed her eyes for a long moment, then turned to her staff. Tell every nation, tell every person, the sky is ours again. The Odyssey began its slow journey home. It had no weapons left, no shields, but it carried something far more powerful. Proof that humanity could face the end of the world and answer with something greater than fear. They had not just fought back. They had created a new kind of war, one where destruction was not chaos but control, not rage but precision, not noise but silence. Lisa sat beside Danny as the ship coasted through quiet space. "What do they call it?" she asked. "The weapon." He looked out at the stars. "I don't know, but it wasn't just a weapon, it was a statement," she nodded, then let them remember it. Far away in the cold reaches between galaxies, the surviving Cathar ships gathered. Their leaders reviewed the data again and again. They saw no explosion, no radiation, no debris field, just absence. And in that absence, they found something they had never known before: doubt. On Earth, children would later ask what happened that night. Adults would struggle to explain. How do you describe a weapon that doesn't kill but unmakes? How do you explain that humanity's greatest act of war was also its most elegant creation? But they would try, because the story mattered, not just as history, but as warning, as promise. When pushed too far, humans don't just survive, they compose. The war ended not with a treaty, not with a handshake, but with silence. The Cathar never returned. Their ships vanished beyond the edge of known space, and no signal, friendly or hostile, ever came from them again. Earth healed slowly. Cities were rebuilt not as they were, but as they could be. New laws were written. Old grudges faded. People planted gardens where glassed earth had been. Children played under skies no longer shadowed by dread. Danny Lopez went back to Houston. He didn't return to the aerospace lab. Instead, he took a job teaching physics at a community college. He stood in front of classrooms filled with wide-eyed students and spoke not just about equations, but about responsibility. He told them how knowledge could build or break worlds. He never mentioned Icarus by name, but sometimes, when the sun set just right, he'd pause and say, "The most powerful things in the universe aren't loud. They're quiet, and that's what makes them dangerous." His dog Max was waiting for him on the porch the day he got home. The neighbor had kept him fed and walked. Max barked once, then wagged his tail like nothing had changed. Danny knelt and hugged him tight. That night, he slept through the dark for the first time in months. Lisa Moore didn't go back to her cabin in Montana. Not right away. She stayed with the Defense Council for 6 more months, helping design a new civilian defense network, one built not on secrecy, but on community. She traveled to towns across the country, teaching people how to build radios from scrap, how to purify water, how to spot surveillance drones. She didn't call it training. She called it being ready. Not for war, she said, but for anything. Eventually, she did return to the mountains, but she didn't live alone. A small group of former soldiers and engineers joined her, turning the old cabin into a school of sorts. They taught survival, yes, but also history, ethics, and repair. Lisa believed that true strength wasn't in weapons, but in knowing how to fix what was broken, whether it was a generator, a bridge, or trust between people. General Helen Briggs retired quietly. She moved to a small house near the coast of Maine, where the ocean stretched out forever and the sky was wide open. She never gave interviews. She never wrote memoirs. But once a year, on the anniversary of the launch, she would walk down to the shore at dawn, stand in the cold wind, and whisper a single sentence to the waves: "You made us proud." The Odyssey was decommissioned. Its hull was stripped, its systems studied, then sealed away in a vault beneath Geneva, along with every blueprint, every note, every line of code related to Project Icarus. An international accord signed by every nation on Earth declared that such a weapon would never be built again. Not because it was evil, but because it was too perfect, too final. Humanity had used it once, and that was enough. Yet the story spread. Not through official channels, but through songs, through street art, through bedtime tales. Parents told their children about the night the stars came back. Artists painted murals of a tiny ship sailing into a sea of darkness. Poets wrote verses about silence that spoke louder than thunder. The event had no official name, but people called it the Unmaking or the Quiet Strike. Some just called it the Answer. Years passed. Satellites returned to orbit, not for war, but for weather, for communication, for watching the health of the planet. Space programs shifted focus. Instead of weapons, they built greenhouses, water recyclers, and solar arrays. The dream of reaching other stars didn't die, it changed. Now, when humans looked up, they didn't see threats. They saw neighbors they hoped to meet one day, carefully, wisely. Danny sometimes visited schools in rural towns. He'd bring simple kits, magnets, wires, batteries, and show kids how to make small fields of force. This, he'd say, holding up a humming coil, is how you learn to respect power, not by using it, but by understanding it. Lisa, now in her late 50s, still trained groups every spring. Her hair had gone gray, but her eyes were sharp. She taught teenagers how to navigate by stars, how to read the wind, how to listen more than they spoke. The Cathar thought we were chaotic, she'd tell them. But chaos isn't weakness. It's freedom. And freedom means you choose how to fight and how to heal. No one knew if other civilizations had heard what happened. But rumors drifted in from deep space probes. Whispers on alien frequencies. Fragments of data that suggested Earth was now marked on galactic maps not as a target, but as a warning. A species that turned desperation into art. A world that answered annihilation with elegance. And that was enough. Humanity didn't become perfect. They still argued. They still made mistakes. But something had shifted in their bones. They knew now what they were capable of. Not just destruction, but creation born from the edge of ruin. They had stared into the abyss and didn't just shout back. They composed a reply so precise, so final, that even the stars seemed to listen. On clear nights, Danny would sit on his porch with Max beside him, looking up at the sky. No ships, no shadows, just stars endless and bright. And sometimes, in the quiet, he'd smile, not from pride, but from peace. Because they had done more than survive. They had shown the universe what it meant to be human.